My name is Bella Smith, and I grew up surrounded by the sounds of carpentry and the aroma of fresh wood. My dad, Henry Smith, owned a family business that specialized in creating handmade furniture. My mom, Angela, complemented his artistic endeavors by handling the business aspects. She could often be found in her home office, carefully managing the finances and communications with clients. She always emphasized that quality craftsmanship takes time. I grew up under the watchful gaze of my grandfather's portrait, a constant reminder of our family's legacy. My dad used to tell me how his father, and his father before him, had built the business from the ground up. He always instilled in me the importance of preserving that heritage. Although as a child, I was more concerned with school and friends. Over time, that sense of responsibility began to resonate more within me. When I turned 20, I started to become more involved in the family business. I spent summers learning the tricks of the workshop, although I also had my own ambitions, perhaps to study law or medicine. However, I felt an increasingly strong connection to my family's craft. When I graduated from university at 24, I noticed something had changed at home. My dad seemed more worried than usual and spent more time in his office. My mom, who had always been optimistic, now displayed a more serious and concerned demeanor. One night, unable to ignore the tension in the air, I decided to find out what was going on. I couldn't bear the atmosphere any longer. While my mom and I were preparing dinner, I confronted her. Reluctantly, she confessed that our business was facing significant challenges due to the emergence of a new, cheaper furniture factory in our area. That revelation was devastating, as it threatened the legacy that generations of Smiths had worked so hard to build. A few days later, while I was relaxing in the living room, my dad urgently called me to his study. Upon entering, I met Mr. Lincoln Lopez, a serious man who examined me with an intense gaze before nodding curtly. The atmosphere was tense, although they didn't explain everything to me at that moment and asked me to leave. It was clear that important decisions were being made. In the following days, the air at home was filled with hushed conversations and uncomfortable silences. It was evident that our family was on the verge of significant changes. I couldn't shake the feeling that our legacy and our way of life were being profoundly challenged. Finally, one rainy Tuesday night, my parents decided it was time to talk to me seriously. We gathered in the living room. My dad had a solemn expression, while my mom fidgeted nervously. "Bella," my dad began, his voice unusually shaky. "We need to talk about something important." I was already imagining the worst possible scenarios. He took a deep breath before continuing. "Do you remember Mr. Lopez, the man you met the other day?" I nodded, feeling my stomach sink. "He's the owner of the large furniture factory I mentioned before." I remembered the factory and the impact it was having on our family business. I felt a mixture of fear and uncertainty, realizing the magnitude of the challenge we faced. My mom's eyes filled with sadness as she nodded in agreement. "Yes, dear. He's been quite aggressive in the market, trying to push us out of the way. But there's more," my dad added, making me lean forward with apprehension. My heart raced as I waited for what was coming next. After a heavy silence, he continued. "He's made an unusual offer." I braced myself for what he was about to say. "He wants to arrange a marriage between you and his son." I was so surprised that I almost laughed, thinking I had misheard. "Excuse me. What?" The words hit me like a blow. Before I could react, my mom quickly intervened. "We know it sounds extreme. Honey. We know this is a lot. And we're not pressuring you. Darling. We just thought you should know." I stood up abruptly, my head spinning. "This is insane. We're in the 20th century. People don't arrange marriages anymore." My dad's face was filled with guilt and worry. "I know, Bella. But the future of our company, your grandfather's legacy, everything is at stake." I paced back and forth, trying to digest the shocking news. "So I'm supposed to marry some guy just to save our family? An arranged marriage? This is medieval," I said, stopping dead in my tracks as I faced my parents, who had always supported my dreams and independence, now looking utterly defeated and desperate. "I need some time," I finally said, breaking the heavy silence in the room. This is a lot to take in. During the following week, I wrestled with the proposal. Part of me was outraged at the mere idea. But another part, deeply connected to our family's legacy, considered the possibility. After much internal debate, I decided to meet with him, Mr. Lopez's son, just to get to know him. I promised myself there would be no commitments, no promises. The meeting would be at an upscale cafe. When I arrived, my heart was pounding. I looked around, trying to identify anyone who might be him. "Bella," a voice called out. I turned and saw a guy my age, with tousled brown hair and a friendly smile. "I'm David. David Lopez," he introduced himself. He wasn't at all like the formal, rigid businessman I had envisioned. With a graceful gesture and a wink, he offered me the chair. "This is pretty weird." He commented casually. I couldn't help but laugh, a genuine sound of amusement breaking the tension. "You can say that again," I replied. As we talked and sipped coffee, I found myself genuinely enjoying the conversation. David was funny, charming, and surprisingly down-to-earth. He even shared his own reservations about his father's old-fashioned ways. Our casual meeting turned into hours of pleasant conversation. And to my surprise, I didn't want it to end. In the following weeks, David and I began to see each other more often. We went to the movies, tried new restaurants, and spent quiet afternoons in the park. One evening, as we walked along the river under a pleasantly clear sky, David said thoughtfully, "You know, I think our parents might have been onto something after all." I looked at him and softly replied, "I think I'm falling in love with you." My heart fluttered in a mixture of surprise and joy as I realized I felt the same way. Maybe, just maybe, this unexpected arrangement could blossom into something genuinely wonderful. When David confessed his growing feelings for me, I knew for certain that I too was falling in love. Our parents, especially thrilled by this turn of events, saw it as a solution to the business pressures both families faced. A few months later, when we announced our engagement, I saw the immense relief on my dad's face. On the other hand, Mr. Lopez, David's father, looked almost triumphantly satisfied. At our wedding reception, Mr. Lopez called me aside. His demeanor was serious as he spoke in a low, direct tone. "Bella, David is a good person, but he needs direction. He needs to mature and become a responsible man. I'm trusting you to help guide him. Can you do that?" Mr. Lopez asked, surprising me with his direct request. Although I hesitated for a moment, I promised to do my best. The first few years of our marriage were a whirlwind. Keeping my promise, I encouraged David to become more involved in the business world. Gradually, he left his carefree college days behind and began taking on more responsibilities at the office. "You're a miracle worker," Mr. Lopez once remarked to me, clearly pleased with David's transformation. However, not everyone viewed these changes positively. David's mother, Sienna, always seemed to look at me with a mixture of suspicion and disapproval. Her strained smiles and curt nods barely concealed what she truly felt. Meanwhile, our family business flourished. My father's company stabilized, and within a year, doubled its turnover, bringing him immense pride and relief. Despite this, I felt restless. One evening, while we were having dinner, I mentioned to David that I was considering getting a job. The sound of his fork hitting the plate punctuated his surprise. "A job? Why? Isn't our situation enough?" he asked incredulously. I explained that I wanted to contribute and make use of my education. But David dismissed the idea. Instead, he suggested I get involved in charity work, as was customary for women in our social circle. Despite my frustrations, I decided to channel my energy into something positive, and founded the Smith Lopez Foundation for Children with Developmental Challenges. It wasn't the career I had envisioned for myself, but it gave me a sense of purpose. For the next decade, my life became a routine of charity galas and social engagements. Everything changed suddenly when David's father passed away, leaving him in charge of the company and assuming the position of CEO overnight. 3 years later, another surprise arrived. Sienna, David's mother, was diagnosed with advanced cancer. She revealed it during a Sunday family dinner. Although her voice was firm, her hands trembled. David immediately suggested admitting her to a specialized care center, but she flatly refused and insisted on staying at home. "We can find a middle ground," I proposed. We'll arrange the best home care for you. Sienna. The best oncologists and nurses. Everything you need. To my surprise, Sienna showed me a rare sign of warmth, patting my hand in gratitude. Over the next few years, I dedicated myself to her care. Her cold demeanor towards me began to shift. One day, as I adjusted her pillows, she looked at me sincerely and said, "You're a good woman, Bella." I'm sorry I didn't see it before. Our relationship became closer from that point on. However, as Sienna and I grew closer, David began to drift away, free from his father's strict oversight. He gradually started reverting to his old habits. His late nights at the office soon became nights at bars. He began missing important meetings and neglecting his responsibilities. One night, he came home smelling of whiskey, a look of defeat in his eyes. "The company went bankrupt," he slurred. "It's all over." I was completely taken aback by how quickly everything had spiraled downwards. "What are we going to do?" he asked, sounding hopeless. His reply was curt and cynical. "What the hell do I know? I was never good at this business anyway." In an attempt to salvage the situation, I swallowed my pride and approached my father. "Dad, I need a favor," I asked bluntly, without hesitation. My father offered David a position as his assistant. Although he accepted it begrudgingly, I couldn't shake the feeling that our troubles were only beginning. The months following David's appointment were a disaster. I watched in despair as sales plummeted and my father's once thriving company began to decline. One night, unable to remain a bystander any longer, I confronted David in our living room. "What is wrong with you?" I demanded. Frustrated. "This job was supposed to be your lifeline, but you treat it like a burden." David let out a bitter laugh. "A lifeline? Please. I'm just biding my time until I can get out of here." I was stunned by his coldness. "What are you talking about?" His answer was chilling. "As soon as my mother dies, I'm going to sell everything. And then I'm leaving." I felt as if I'd been punched in the stomach. "How can you be so callous? That's your mother." The disdain on his face was evident. "She's a burden," he replied indifferently. "And this job is beneath me. I was a CEO, not some flunky assistant." My anger exploded. "You ungrateful idiot. My dad gave you a chance when you were down and out. And this is how you repay his generosity. Meanwhile, I've been here holding everything together while you wallow in self-pity." I stormed out of the room. In the hallway, I ran into Sienna. Her expression made it clear she had heard everything. For a moment, we just looked at each other in silence. Then she reached out and took my hand. Her touch was silent but supportive. I squeezed her hand tightly, trying to hold back the tears. Weeks passed in uncomfortable tension until one grey Tuesday morning, my world came crashing down. A police officer arrived at the house to inform me that my parents had been killed in a car accident. I was completely numb as I went through the funeral arrangements as if I were a ghost, overwhelmed by the grief of loss. Despite everything, David remained distant. He offered me no support, not once, and didn't even attend the funeral. As I watched my parents' caskets being lowered, a mix of grief and anger took hold. After leaving the cemetery, I had our company secretary call David to the office. "Is David there?" I asked. There was a pause. "Yes. He's in your father's office," she replied softly, her voice filled with sorrow. Still in my funeral attire, I drove straight to the company. I barged into my father's office and found David sitting nonchalantly in my father's chair, feet up on the desk. "What the hell do you think you're doing? Get out of my father's chair," I yelled. His reply was dismissive, further enraging me. "Your father's chair? I think you mean my chair," he retorted smugly, trying to reason with him. I pleaded. "Please. This isn't right. My father just died." He slammed his hand on the desk, silencing me. "Enough. I've had enough of your manipulations. Bella. Your constant nagging and attempts to fix things have made my life miserable," he declared with a sneer. I was in shock. "What are you talking about?" I managed to say. But he just snarled. "You heard me. You've been trying to change me since the day we got married. Well, surprise. I never loved you. I only married you because my father forced me to." His cruel words hit me deeply. I stumbled backward from the impact. David's expression turned sly. "Oh. And this might interest you. This company. valued at approximately $42 million, now belongs to me. As co-director. I whispered in disbelief. You can't do that. He smirked, raising an eyebrow. Oh, I can. I control all the passwords and access to the accounts. I'm in charge now, Bella. And there's nothing you can do about it. To my horror, he turned to the computer and started transferring company funds to his account. Stop, I shouted, rushing forward. This stranger had replaced my husband. I knew what I had to do. I had to leave. Without a word, I walked out of the office and went straight to the office of Mr. Asher, my father's lawyer and close confidant. He greeted me with solemn eyes. Your father anticipated something like this might happen, he said, handing me an envelope containing my father's will. With trembling hands, I read the letter as tears streamed down my face. The business was mine, and David had been officially fired 3 weeks before my father's death. The letter was heartbreaking. My dearest Bella, if you are reading this, I am gone. I am sorry for pushing you into this marriage and for not seeing David for who he truly was. You deserve so much more. The company is yours now. Make it thrive again. Please. Divorce that useless man. Live your life and be happy. That's all I ever wanted for you. Love you. Dad. Always so resolute and empowered. I looked at Mr. Asher. Please file these divorce papers immediately, I instructed. Heartbroken but resolute, I returned to the house that no longer felt like home. Inside, it seemed colder and emptier. I found Sienna, frail and wrapped in a blanket, in the living room. Sienna, I began softly. I need to tell you something. David and I are getting divorced. I'm leaving. To my surprise, tears welled up in her eyes. Take me with you, Bella. Please, she pleaded, stunned but moved by her request. I was about to agree when the front door burst open. David stormed in, his features contorted with fury. What did you do? The company accounts are blocked. I can't access anything. I stood my ground, facing him with newfound strength. The company isn't yours, David. My father left it to me, and I've signed the divorce papers. We're no longer married. You have no right to anything here. David's face flushed deep red, his eyes then shifting to Sienna, who was quietly packing a small bag. What are you doing? Mom, he demanded. Sienna looked him in the eye with quiet firmness. I'm leaving with her, she declared. For a moment, David was too stunned to respond. The reality of his new situation was slowly beginning to sink in. David exploded in a rage, hurling insults at Sienna. Ungrateful trash, he screamed. After everything I've done for you. Her words stung. But he was implacable. Fine. Get out. Both of you. I'm better off without either of you. And so we left. Moving into my new chapter. Night after night, I sat reviewing financial reports. Determined to preserve my father's legacy, I brought Daisy, my father's trusted secretary, on board as my assistant. Her deep knowledge of the company's operations was invaluable. Gradually, I regained control, and the company began to thrive again. We even expanded the charitable initiatives through our foundation. 3 years later, Sienna's health began to decline significantly. I reduced my work hours to care for her and ensure her final days were as comfortable as possible. One quiet autumn morning, she passed away peacefully as I held her hand. I felt a profound gratitude for the time we had spent together. I arranged a beautiful funeral to honor her, sparing no expense. David, as expected, didn't show up. A few weeks after Sienna's funeral, I received a call from Mr. Yeon, the Lopez family notary, requesting my attendance at the reading of Sienna's will. When I arrived at the notary's office, my heart sank. David was there, as smug as ever, with a young woman on his arm. He sneered at me. Well, if it isn't the grieving widow, he chuckled. Don't worry. This won't take long. I'll take my mother's money and give my lovely Georgia a well-deserved vacation. I ignored his taunts and took a seat far from them. Mr. Yeon began the reading, silencing the room. As he read the will, David's smile widened. But then one sentence cut through the tension. I, Sienna Lopez, being of sound mind, hereby bequeath all my assets, including my house and savings, to Bella Smith. The room went silent. David's face drained of color as Mr. Yeon continued. It is my wish that Bella use these assets to further support the charitable foundation for children with developmental challenges, which she has championed so passionately. Tears welled up in my eyes. Even in death, Sienna was showing her love and support. David erupted again. This is ridiculous. She must have manipulated my mother. Bella, you're a fraud. You've ruined my life. And now you're stealing my inheritance. His companion looked bewildered. Wait. You mean you don't have any money? As David gathered his belongings, his words fell on deaf ears. Georgia. Baby. I can explain. But she was already leaving. David turned his rage on me. You'll pay for this. Bella. I'll contest the will. Mr. Yeon interrupted calmly. I'm afraid that won't happen. It is possible, Mr. Lopez, that your mother's will is ironclad. She was of sound mind when she made these decisions. And I witnessed them being made. David's resolve crumbled. And he stalked out of the office. A broken man. When the door closed behind him, I let out a sigh I didn't realize I was holding. A sense of triumph washed over me. Not because of the inheritance, but because justice had been served. Affirming Sienna's faith in me and our shared values. Sienna's belief in me had remained strong until the very end. A thought that filled my heart every time I reflected on it. I'd like to set up a trust for the foundation immediately, Mr. Yeon said, his voice thick with emotion. It's what she would have wanted. In the following months, I dedicated myself wholeheartedly to the company and the foundation. Under my leadership, my father's business not only regained its past success but soared to even greater heights. Meanwhile, the charitable foundation grew significantly, reaching more children and making a more profound impact than ever before. Each night, as I sat in the office that was once my father's and was now mine, I would pause and look at the photographs on my desk. There were pictures of my parents, their faces beaming with pride, and of Sienna, her eyes twinkling with playful mischief. Although they were no longer with me, their love and support continued to shape who I had become. Besides these photos, I had a framed quote that became my guiding principle. I picked it up and read the words that resonated more deeply each time. The most difficult roads often lead to the most beautiful destinations. This mantra reminded me of the journey I had taken. One filled with challenges and hardships, but one that had led me to a place of profound fulfillment and purpose. Each word reaffirmed my commitment to carry on their legacy, honoring their memory through every decision I made and every child we helped through the foundation.